Well, we'll start with how you got the idea for a cookbook.
Okay. For many, many years, I've been traveling with a physicist, married to a physicist, and therefore interested in cooking because all physicists are interested in eating. And so in my travels, I collected recipes. And I had stacks and stacks and stacks of them, always given to me by physics wives or physicists or friends of physics. And I decided, wouldn't it be fun to collect this and into a book and then sell it and raise some funds for physics, who always are interested in some fundraiser. And since nothing here in town is done for physics, we thought. I went to Maggie and said, Maggie, will you help me because I have no idea on the business end of things. I have no idea how to organize this. I know you're really good at this kind of stuff.
And I really thought, oh, we would publish a book? That's a lot of work. That's like 2 or 3 years worth of work.
And it turned out to be 3
and
years.
it turned out to be 3 years worth of it. But we had, and B, luckily, had a friend who was married to a physicist and who is a physicist. But she also is a writer. And so she did the first piece we had, I think, on the history of Aspen. It's in this book. And that was Grace Bruck.
And it's the history of the center. And she wrote very well. And therefore, anyone that's watching this should really get hold of a book. Here's the book.
Here's the book that we spent 3 years at.
And the introduction written by Grace Bruck. Tell us how this whole center started. And she does it in a very witty way, charming way, and with all the details, all the stuff that nobody ever heard of, she managed to put into the introduction. And then Maggie, of course, got this fabulous illustrator. In fact, 2 illustrators.
That's right.
One of the illustrators is a Native American.
That's right. Diane Voigt, who did most of the illustrations, lives here in the valley. She lives near near Rifle, and she and I had met. Oh gosh, a long time ago, several years before we did this cookbook, and then she had done. When we first started doing the winter lectures in physics, and Martin said, you're going to have to do publicity. And so Diane did the posters for the publicity, and she saw to the publicity down valley from Glenwood Springs on down. So over the years, Diane and I had worked together. And so when it came to the cookbook, Diane said, a book? I've never done anything like a book. But she came up with the ideas, and Bea had all these recipes, which she tried out on Martin to be sure they were okay.
Bea, you didn't just put in recipes that you'd collected, you sought them out.
Oh yes, and some were sort of creative products of my attempt, and it took 3 years of testing because I wouldn't dare put a recipe in a book that I hadn't tried.
Well, as I recall, you two put out an appeal to all the people at the center to submit recipes. Would you like to talk about doing that?
That wasn't very successful.
No, it wasn't. Bea really had most of them, and the ones she didn't have, well, we had several people who were actually very fine cooks who were willing to give us recipes. And then we had, Bea had to try them out, so that took some time. But we were a little bit shy of Oriental recipes, so we got hold of a Chinese guy.
Well, it was
had
that
a
was a
website.
very funny story because I one day opened the Denver Post, which and read that there was a graduate student at the University of Chicago who was very creative cook and Chinese cook, and put out some recipes for his fellow graduate students. And at the end of this little article was the email address of this particular person. I looked at the email address and said, there isn't nobody at the University of Chicago that would have a Fermilab email address. I took the email address and wrote. Well, it turned out this person was not a graduate student. He had a PhD from Northwestern, and he was working for the wife of one of Martin's colleagues, my husband's colleagues. And so I said, can we use some of your recipes? And he said, you can use every one of them. So we tested them all, and one of the chapters, this Chinese chapter, contributed by a computer scientist, not a physicist, at Fermilab.
But that was okay.
That was terrific. And then we have some more professionals. We have more chapters
We
contributed.
have several chapters.
One
contributed.
is the young woman that runs a very fancy restaurant at this national laboratory, which is Fermilab. Her name is Tita Jensen, and I knew her before she married Hans Jensen, and she had studied in Boston at a cooking school. And so when this young couple married and came to Fermilab, Tita opened a restaurant called Chez Léon after the then director of the Fermilab, and it became the best place to eat in that part of Illinois. She contributed a chapter. Then we have some more.
Yeah, Peter
Peter Carruthers,
Carruthers.
who great fisherman, who had his own way of preparing trout. He contributed that for us.
Yeah.
And Harold McGee, who is a famous cookbook author,
Oh, very famous.
and he was willing to contribute something to our book. So slowly but surely,
got
but
it
we didn't
together.
want it to be so boring and just be recipes. And there is a journal called
I forget the name of that journal.
the Journal of Improbable
That's
Research.
Improbable Research.
And they had some very, very funny things in that journal. So we wrote to the author, the editor of the journal, for permission to use some of the things that they featured. And they gave us their blessing and let us use the article. We also have a serious article, which was first published in Nature, on how to make sauce béarnaise. And it was written by two Swiss physicists that published. And we went to Nature and asked, can we use that? And Nature wrote back and said, if you send us X number of dollars, we will give you permission to use it. So that was the only fee we ever had to
Yeah,
pay,
that's right.
So when this was finished, it had a grand debut in a big lawn party at an open house at the Physics Center.
Well, actually, we didn't have a big. We had the ice cream party.
Well,
is
I know
something.
okay, so
But that
so
came
that was
later.
long after the cookbook came out.
Right. We
That
had
was
a
about a
book
year.
signing at the local bookstore.
At the Explorer bookstore. Yeah.
Right. And that was rather fun.
That was fun.
Uh-huh.
But our book is on Amazon.com, so you can order it that way. But we didn't have a big opening, I don't think.
No.
Well, we just publicized it, and we did get publicity in the newspapers and so forth. And then Beate wanted to be sure that all the laboratories, because there are lots of people in laboratories, so there are lots of physicists and there are lots of other people. And so you saw to it that the laboratories got copies.
And in their publications reviewed it. And the best review was written in the CERN Courier, which was just marvelous and sold lots
Yeah.
of cookbooks.
Yeah.
But we should really talk about the title, because it was a combination of our efforts. And I said,
Everything
sure,
was
you know, it's just kind of a chaotic experiment, and it's a physics term, so how about chaos in the kitchen? And then Maggie said, well, let's complete it and do equals symmetry at the table. So we did this together. And then when the cookbook came out, one of the first requests of a copy was from someone at the Bohr Institute in Copenhagen who said, I work on chaos and symmetry, and I need to have this book.
White aprons are very easy to come by on eBay. And so I got a bunch of aprons, and then Diane got them, who did the illustrations, Diane Boy, got them printed. It's sort of a silk screening process. So, and then we sold them at every opportunity we had. We have a recipe for ice cream from a young postdoc, I think that guy was, at Williams College. And he had given us a recipe. He does this every year for his course, the beginning of his course. It's physics for everybody. And they make ice cream with liquid nitrogen and so forth. And so I thought we'd rent it. We'd rent some nitrogen, and we had the cream, and we had raspberries, I think. And so we invited everybody in town to come, and they all came. And we didn't have enough liquid hydrogen. We ran out of that. So we ran out of ice cream. And everybody, and the one thing he didn't say in the recipe was you needed to wear gloves. Because when you had a wooden spoon, the spoon got very cold and your hands stuck to it. So it was Dave DeYoung who was making it like mad. And he had all kinds of burns on his hands afterwards. But everybody wanted to do it the next year, but 1 year was enough. That was
It was a huge success.
We sold a lot of books and aprons.
Yes.
So tell about what the recipe for the ice cream is.
I have to look it up. Well, I'll tell you, liquid nitrogen, and then you have put fruit in and cream. And that's it.
And stir.
And stir. But stir with a wooden spoon. That's for sure. And you have to have gloves. And it's better if the gloves go halfway up your arm, because if you get that, it's liquid nitrogen is not kind to the skin. It dissolves the skin. So that was really very, very funny. Well, now when we first met that first night for the winter conference, it was a night, I think, and whichever hall it was that we met in, there was no heat, so we were all freezing in there. And we were sitting at these funny desks that had this arm thing that you didn't have. I had seen since I was in second grade, I think. Anyway, we sat there, and that was so funny. And Bea was getting all kinds of things together. You were getting bags and sweaters and things with winter conference and Aspen Center for Physics and Art. And I thought to myself after that was the best publicity Aspen the center ever had. Well, all these things that these physicists took back to their home universities.
Well, it was the first winter conference, and I went to Obermeyer Sport, which is a local manufacturer of ski clothing, and introduced myself to Klaus Obermeyer and told him that we were having a winter meeting at the Center for Physics, and that the center had a very tiny budget, but we would love to have some turtlenecks, shirts, and some sweaters, some to sell, to raise some funds, and others to give away for people that have helped in introducing the winter meetings. So he was very cooperative, and he said, why, by all means, and I'll give them to you at cost. Well, that was step number one. The next step was that these items had to have some physics identity, so they needed to be embroidered. There was an embroidery shop in town, so armed with turtlenecks and sweaters, I went and gave them the whole story and told them that Klaus Obermeyer is giving this to us at cost. And they said, oh, well, then we'd like to help physics along, so we'll do the same thing. And so slowly, within a limited budget, we were able to do this. But the design, that was a big problem because we didn't know anyone that was artistic to design Aspen Winter Physics Conference series and the date. So Martin and I sat down with a piece of paper and we sketched it out, and that was the first logo. It wasn't very interesting, but it told the story. And then Martin had this wonderful idea that physicists are very reluctant after giving a lecture to write up this material and get it back in order to be ready for publication. So we had turtlenecks for the number of people that gave papers and a little note on the turtleneck saying, "You may keep this turtleneck shirt if you get your paper in by a certain date." And not a single paper was late. The publication was born.
I thought if we're going to do this, and then Martin had said, you come and you're going to do the public lectures. And I thought, well, then what we've got to do is these people have to eat so they can come to our house and eat. And that's all I thought. And I had to say, I had all those cats. And cat food and physics food kind of shared the same place. And nobody seemed to mind eating the cat food or the physics food. So we had tons of people in the house. It was great fun.
It was fantastic how the DeWolfs opened their house for 100 strangers.
But they were
And not
interesting
only
strangers.
once, they did this 2 times. That is, the first week of the meetings, and then a completely new crowd for the second week of the meetings. And each time your house was overrun with happy eaters.
Happy eaters.
It was just wonderful. And
It was fun.
the highlight of the winter meeting, to be able to go to someone's beautiful house, stuff themselves, and be warm. It was the middle of winter. Everything was covered with snow. It was
And
just
physicists, of course, had been skiing, so they had a good appetite.
exactly.
Yeah. And Diane Boyd, who did the illustrations for the cookbook, is also a very good cook, and she and I would do all the cooking.
Imagine for 100 people, strangers that you had never met.
No, but they got to be not strangers. Lots of them. So it was fun because it was new, and we were doing these things that we had done before.
Well, in order to entertain this crowd for a week in the mountains, not only working very hard, giving papers and doing physics, there had to be some recreation also. Maggie opened her home for dinner, but in addition to that, there were ski races that took place one afternoon. There was an award dinner that included trophies, and then there was an evening of just wine and cheese at the Aspen Historical Society. And the reason we were able to get that is I happened to have been a volunteer there and persuaded them that it was an honor for them to have this international conference have an evening. So they opened their doors, supplied wine and cheese, and all that was left was for us to figure out how everyone would get there. But Martin had the idea of hiring coaching horses that would make constant round trips from the meadows to the Historical Society. And especially our foreign visitors were intrigued with this because that's what they saw in the old Western films, but never in real life. So we had an evening at the Historical Society, and it was serviced by coach and horses. Maggie and Nick are the warmest, most wonderful hosts you would ever dream of having anywhere in the world. And we were just fortunate enough to have them open their home here especially for the foreign visitors who had never been inside the doors of any of these beautiful houses in this snow country. And so it was a very great privilege. And they really enjoyed every moment of every hour that they spent there. And there were many hours because people wouldn't leave. Do you remember that, Maggie? It was supposed to be, I think, from 7 till 9. And by midnight, there were still people at Maggie and Nick's.
But that's what it was interesting conversation. But it was great. It really was great fun.
You know, we were attached to physics. So every year, someone thought of a job for us to do.
Oh, yes.
It's never ending, and it continues.
It's true. That is
So
true.
we're easy.
To do things, it's always something that does need doing at the center, one way or another.
So if they need volunteers for anything, our phone rings.
There it is. Yeah.
Correct.
But I think that it would be nice to have another one of those with more liquid nitrogen, another one of those ice cream parties. I think people really enjoyed that, but it takes some doing.
Just to get enough liquid nitrogen was a difficult thing. And it turns out that people that I think preserve the sperm of
Oh yes,
bulls
when the bulls,
need
ranchers need
need liquid nitrogen,
liquid
and that was our source.
yeah, ranchers supply. But I didn't realize that when you get a tank, it's not all the way full; it's half full. So you have to have more than one tank. Volunteerism is not big today as it was in our day.
I guess not.
I think cooking a salmon in a dishwasher is not something that
Well, that I
anybody
used to do.
Yeah.
This is, did I write that up for the cookbook?
I think
also?
so.
I think so. One summer my husband and I were at Brookhaven National Laboratories, and he's a great fisherman. So he went on a short weekend to Canada to fish for salmon, fly fish for salmon. And he brought back two huge salmon. And we had lots of friends at the lab. And how do you prepare this? Because we had a kitchen that was sort of tucked into the wall, and certainly no vessel that was available to cook a salmon in. And so I decided that I'd use a dishwasher. And I put the salmon on the top shelf where the glasses usually are, wrapped it in foil, and added lemon and herbs, and let it go through a cycle and a half. And voila, we had salmon dinner.
But you have to be ingenious. Those are the days that you had to be ingenious because nobody else was going to do it for you. So you did it yourself. Whatever way
The
you
funny
could.
thing is the guests were all obliged to bring something, and one of them was assigned to bring something for Martin, who is the fisherman and brought the fish but cannot eat it.